I couldn't do nothing about it.
October 22nd, 1968. Charles Holt was 19 at the time, living in an institution for boys in Butner, North Carolina, when his life was drastically changed, without his consent.
They sent me to Rex Hospital, and then they just pushed me in a room and just gave me some kind of gas. I just went off to sleep. Then when I woke up from it, I knew something was wrong, and they told me what they'd done, and I wasn't a happy camper.
What they had done was surgery, a vasectomy to make him sterile. But why? It turns out the order came from the state, which said he was feeble-minded and unworthy of having children.
I want to be out to be just like any other young man, to try to have a family and have some kids that I could call my own, but it didn't happen that way.
Charles Holt wasn't alone. In fact, his story is only one representing a shameful chapter in American history. From 1907 through the 1970s, more than 60,000 Americans were sterilized because they had, quote, unfit human traits. It was called eugenics. The goal? Breed out those considered to be a burden on the rest of society and make, quote, better human beings tomorrow. 33 states had eugenics programs at one time or another, supported by some of the nation's most respected doctors and social workers. Even the Supreme Court approved it. Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote in one 1927 case, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. In North Carolina, anyone, a parent, a teacher, a neighbor, could ask the state eugenics board to have someone sterilized. Some victims were developmentally disabled, living in institutions. Records show others were living at home, forced to go under the surgeon's knife because they were paupers, or because they were blind or deaf or had syphilis.
You could be sterilized if you were sexually promiscuous.
Or if you were paralyzed or not physically attractive, they have a skin disorder, this person's not fit to reproduce.
The state of North Carolina has tasked Charmaine Fuller Cooper to uncover this frightening past.
The first time last year that I actually had to read an actual eugenics board record of an individual patient case file, I literally sat at my desk and cried for about 15 minutes.
Her research shows about 7,600 people in North Carolina were sterilized. Procedures here continued into the 1970s, well after many states had stopped, so it's estimated about 2,000 victims are still alive. In later years, the focus targeted women on welfare, many of whom were African American. North Carolina has become the only state to take steps to compensate victims. For nearly 10 years, the state legislature has written reports, submitted bills, even heard testimony from victims.
I wouldn't have mind having me a daughter, maybe 2, maybe 3. The state need to award us, because we got to carry on.
But so far, these victims have received nothing more than apologies from Governor Bev Perdue.
I just came here as a mama and as a grandmama and as governor of the state, quite frankly, to tell you it was wrong.
Compensating victims could cost tens of millions of dollars during a time of budget cuts. State legislators, like Representative Ruth Samuelson, are worried about money.
We had to set priorities, things like, do we compensate eugenics victims or do we put classroom teachers in place? We had to make choices.
Is it possible these victims will, in the end, walk away with nothing?
That is a possibility if we don't have legislators who are willing to stand up for the victims.
Charles Holt knows he may never see a dime.
So the state of North Carolina has said they're sorry. Is that enough?
No.
What more do they need to do?
I think they should give us some compensation off of it.
2012 could be the year the legislature acts. Charles Holt holds out hope for an award he says will fit the crime done to him more than 4 decades ago.
What's just horrible is they did this to person after person after person.
Yes, ma'am. It's real. It's just disgusting.
Elizabeth Cohen, CNN, Linwood, North Carolina.
Stunning that this happened and that in some places, I mean, anyone could suggest someone else should be sterilized. Well, North Carolina was unusual in this sense. Most states required people to be in institutions, to be civilly committed before they could be operated on. But North Carolina was wide open. A social worker, a doctor, the sheriff, the truancy officer, or a teacher, anyone could make this recommendation to the Eugenics Board.
And it could be just because someone was promiscuous?
Certainly, sexual misbehavior was high on the list of things that people were sterilized for, not only in North Carolina, but in other states as well.
Ariva, what's the likelihood that anyone will actually get compensated, and how do you even put a dollar figure on something like this?
You know, Anderson, when I hear this story, it just makes my blood boil. And to hear that the legislators are saying we're sorry, as if that's enough, that's just half the role here. We're talking about a matter of distributive justice. This is a matter of justice, plain and simply. The state took an aggressive step, intentional acts of violating these people. I mean, your most inalienable right, your right to be a parent, your right to reproduce was, taken away from these individuals simply because some board determined that they weren't fit. They weren't, capable of producing the kind of children that the state deemed, desirable. So I hope that the legislature in this case steps up and compensates, makes whole these individuals who've suffered such an atrocity.
And Ariva, who was disproportionately targeted? I mean, I'm guessing African Americans, women.
African American and women. There was this whole gender thing happening. It was thought that women in particular were incapable of making, good decisions about their reproductive rights, or that they were more promiscuous than men. So women were targeted. And as we heard in the piece, African Americans disproportionately impacted in a negative way by this, this state action. And that's what's so galling about this. This isn't, private individuals. This is every branch of government, state legislature, the executive branch, and the judicial branch determining that certain individuals and those, who without a voice in our society were not, were not worthy of having children.
And Paul, this was happening in 33 states, including Puerto Rico. North Carolina, are they the only ones even talking about compensation?
Well, as you showed in your graphic, there were more than 30 states that actually had these laws, but only 7 of them have actually recommended an apology, taken a position at all. There are still 20-some-odd states that haven't even gone that far. So the idea that the states will face this with compensation skips over the fact that many of them haven't even admitted that it happened.
There's also, I guess, Paul, some who kind of view this as a left-right argument. To you, do you see it in those terms?
I don't see it that way either today or historically. Historically, there were people from all branches of not only government, but all parts of the political spectrum that supported eugenics. Every president from Teddy Roosevelt to Herbert Hoover, and those in the middle, including people like Woodrow Wilson, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, supported some kind of eugenics in the first third of the century. Today, we've got almost everyone condemning it, but I see very few people coming forward and saying it's time to address this with some kind of compensation.
Ariva, is there any accurate number of how many people are still alive who were directly affected by this? I mean, in the piece, Elizabeth was reporting some 2,000 maybe alive in North Carolina.
Yeah, that number is startling enough for North Carolina, Anderson, but also what we do know is that, reparations occurred with respect to Japanese internment camps. Reagan and then President Bush, provided resources, $20,000 for individuals who were in those internment camps. And I would say that's the floor for these individuals because that was displacement, that was loss of property. We're talking about violation of people's bodies, being forced into surgery, being coerced, being told that if you don't sign for this surgery, you're going to be placed in an orphanage, or in the case of parents on welfare, that they were going to lose their benefits if they did not, submit to this surgery. So the numbers are staggering. And there's a case, Anderson, in Alberta, Canada, where a woman sued the government for wrongful sterilization and actually recovered over $700,000. And that caused that government to step up and make available close to $140 million to individuals, over 1,000 who had been, sterilized by a similar government program. So there's a little hope out there that North Carolina and other states, and I recognize what Paul is saying, that some states haven't even said they're sorry. But I think North Carolina has an opportunity to do something unique, and that's to say that these individuals matter.